All right, well, the last lecture, we looked at the difference between Plato's and Aristotle's epistemologies. Today we're going to look at Aristotle's account of causation. And we're going to begin to look toward his accounts of morality and happiness. But I've been reading the essays on your examinations. And I know several of you think we ought to have more question and answer exchanges in here. You wrote rather persuasively about that. And your primary reason, I think, was to make sure everybody was more engaged in the classroom process. So here we are at a few minutes past 10 on a Wednesday morning in Hayes 113. What are you doing here, Braden?
Came to listen to you.
You did what? Came to listen to me?
Came to listen to you. I'm so brain dead at this point in the morning, I don't want to do anything but listen to you talk.
No coffee will do it, huh? Carrie, what are you doing here?
Learning about Aristotle.
Learning about Aristotle. Yeah. Mary Beth, what are you doing here?
I'm coming to class.
Coming to class. Yeah. Zilima? Getting your money's worth. Well, I hope so. That's a threatening remark. Remington, what are you doing here?
I'm trying to learn at least a little piece of philosophy.
At least a little piece, huh? Did y'all catch that story about the bricklayers in your textbook? It's kind of at the end of the last assignment. What did the bricklayer say? You walk up to the bricklayer, and the first one says, he says, "What are you doing?" And he says, "Laying bricks." Yeah. Walks up to the next one and says, "What are you doing?" "Building an arch." Walks up to the third one and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm building a cathedral." Yes, sir.
I have a question. It's not related to this, but our essays are due Monday.
Right. Essays are due on Monday. Yeah, and we'll talk about those if you want after we put Aristotle aside here in a few minutes. So don't let me forget. Remind me of that. Okay, so one guy's laying a brick, another guy's building an arch, another guy's building a cathedral. Obviously not by himself, but as part of a big team. Three very different ways to answer the question. And maybe at 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, laying a brick is close enough. Huh? Still brain dead, or haven't been up long, or didn't stay in bed long or something. I don't know. But nobody said anything about developing their character or planning their life, laying a strong foundation for thinking philosophically across the years. And, it's just, so maybe we're just laying bricks this morning. All right, let's go back to the subject matter. We talked about it last time. What are the primary differences between the way Plato pursues truth and the way Aristotle pursues truth? In the terms that Socio would give us, what are some differences between their epistemologies? Jordan.
Plato focuses more on truths and math. He appreciated that more, and Aristotle basically on just like visible reality.
Okay. Plato focuses a lot on truths in mathematics, and Aristotle focuses on visible reality. Mary Beth?
Perception of the senses. Aristotle was all about the senses.
Yeah. Right. What we see, Aristotle focuses on perceptions of the senses, what we see and touch and so on.
Theory of forms.
Theory of forms? Yeah.
A little different.
Right.
Aristotle believes the form is in the object. Plato believes that the form is more above and beyond, like something you can't really see.
Okay, good. That in their theory of forms, that Plato thinks the form is somewhere else that can't be seen, part of the non-visible world, whereas Aristotle thinks the form is in everything or in every person. Now, in a sense, that's metaphysics, not epistemology. But it's so closely related to epistemology, you can't do epistemology without dealing with metaphysics, and vice versa. They're both very closely related. But it's one thing to say, here is a truth, and here's how I found out, and that's epistemology. And it's another thing to say, truth exists somewhere, which would be a metaphysical statement. And then, of course, you have to answer, where is that answer the question about where is that truth? Where could we find it? Anything else there? What kind of, I mean, these are two very different choices, and they have sort of split philosophy into two main camps that still exist in large measure. So if you were going to find something that you think might be a weakness, say in Plato's thought, what might that be? Matt, spot any particular weaknesses in Plato? No? Well, you're a mathematician, aren't you? So I guess you like Plato. He's a mathematician. Zach? What sort of things did we see in Plato's notion that truth is out there somewhere, as opposed to anything that biologists and physicists and chemists could help us with? Mary Beth?
Plato's idea of truth existing is a lot more vague, I think, in that people can't actually prove, in a sense that we use the word today, prove whether or not a truth is in fact true. It just has to be divined through thought, and they can't actually experience it, I don't think. I mean, you can to a certain degree, but not really like so much as Aristotle's truths.
So your point is that Plato's truths are often not as accessible to just ordinary people, is it? Yeah. But not maybe all truths?
What do you mean?
Well, Matt, you want to jump in as a mathematician here? And is mathematics just a matter of opinion?
I would think so.
Yeah. Is it fact?
I think so.
Yeah. Now fact may not be the best word because it is hard to touch. I mean, the existence of this desk here is sort of a fact, and fact in this other sense. Philosophers differ as to whether it's like a logical truth or conceptual truth as opposed to there are 30 desks in this room kind of fact about reality, you know.
I guess Aristotle's view would be something that the everyday person can experience every day. You don't have to be a mathematician to experience the truth that Aristotle finds in the world.
Okay. All right. Any weaknesses in Aristotle's view that you can think of? Anybody? Somebody who's feeling Platonic today and not Aristotelian. Huh?
Well, he doesn't really offer like an explanation, I guess, for like how everything got here.
Who?
Sorry, Aristotle.
Aristotle doesn't offer an explanation.
Like, you know, I guess with Plato, I would think, you know, a higher form would make more sense because then there would be a reason for why we're all here, I guess.
All right, so Plato gives us an explanation, whether it's accessible or not, gives us an explanation of why reality has this shape in ways that you think Aristotle does not. It's just sort of here and we...
Like that there could be a higher being or something.
Right,
Aristotle
okay.
was
Yeah.
almost atheistic.
Okay. Well, Aristotle does come up with a sort of a higher being, and it's in some way, and we just haven't gotten there, and our book doesn't really take us there with the excerpts we have, but he does have this kind of notion that we'll come back to when we look at, say, Thomas Aquinas, because Aristotle thinks about there being this outer realm of reality that he calls the unmoved mover, and which is tied up with his notion of the fact that all change involves some kind of moving or motion. And he thinks there must be some ultimate source of that. And Christians and others have looked at that and thought, aha, maybe that's God. So, yeah. But since we're dealing with epistemology and stuff, we haven't got, and we're going to deal with mostly ethics toward the end today and next time. So, but yeah, that's a good point.
Their ideas
Yes,
of the good are different also, aren't they? Like
they are, big time.
Plato says the ultimate truth, I guess, would be the good, idea of the good is, like, what is that word? The one that starts with an E.
Oh, Aristotle, yeah, eudaimonia. Yeah. So very different notions of the good. Yeah, one with Plato, kind of an abstract, transcendent good, and Aristotle's eudaimonia, something that, if it exists, exists in our lives. Yeah.
It's an individual thing as opposed to being ultimate.
All right, it is an individual thing. I would say, however, it's individual and kind of group-oriented, because, and we can explain a little more why that's so, because he doesn't really think of us as individuals. All of us are either teachers or students, parents or children, workers or bosses or something, you know, that everybody exists in all these relationships, leaders or followers, and that they define us more than just say, here's how I feel today, which is a kind of a modern thing to do. So at that point, Aristotle kind of focuses on things that are not very, very modern, and the kinds of things that people like to hear now about individualism.
Yeah, well, like one little side thing I read said that he kind of accepted slavery because, like, he didn't view like women or Asians as like whole humans.
Yeah.
Children were like potential humans.
Yeah, there are a couple of different words we use for that sort of thing, but one of them is the term elitist. He is an elitist. He thinks some people are just better by nature. Men, for example, right? I mean, who would want a woman for a best friend, he asks at one point. And now, everybody has a bit of elitism in them. Honestly, there's somebody that you think is just not as good as you by nature of the kind of people they are. Everybody's that way. Now the question is there some defensible elitism or not? Or is all elitism just completely built on falsehood? And we saw it with Plato, we see it again with Aristotle. And my suggestion was you think about it in terms of, you know, if you go to the hospital for surgery, you want the one who is best prepared to do that. And at that point you think that it's good to distinguish between people who are skilled and knowledgeable and successful in that way and those who are not. You don't want the guy who flunked out of surgery class 3 times before he passed, you know. You want the best surgeon there. You don't want the guy who cheated on the test, you know, that is somehow important to your treatment. You want the one who learned the stuff and internalized it and became, at least for that particular social role, a better qualified person. And that's sort of where Aristotle is going to go with all this developing one's own excellence. Let me say just a word before I ask you some more questions here. Let me say a word about this transition that we're making here from Plato's forms to Aristotle's alternative explanation. Remember, Plato's forms, as you said, are kind of eternally unchanging, perfect ideas. They are not based on the visible world. The visible world is based on them, reversing what many people of an Aristotelian bent would think. You know them through math and logic. But Aristotle's forms are abstracted from the visible world. Aristotle distinguishes between matter and form. Before Socrates, several philosophers had spent their time trying to figure out what matter is in itself, what it might be like. Some of them thought that it might be reducible to just a few elements, that maybe if you break up the stuff of the world, it's all ultimately made out of water or earth or fire or something like, or maybe some combination of 3 or 4 of those basic elements. And Aristotle is not interested in doing that kind of philosophy. After Socrates, that sort of thing died off for a long time until people were able to make better sense of that. Aristotle is more interested in understanding the natural world as a whole and understanding the processes involved when humans make plans and make things and organize amongst themselves, all the purposeful activities in life. And so he focuses on 4 kinds of causation. So who can tell me what they are? Nick, give me one of the 4 kinds of causes according to Aristotle's account. Got the book out here. Pardon? All right, the material. Formal. Efficient. Yeah, okay. Now, Aristotle suggests that if we go through these 4, we can have a pretty good understanding of a lot of things. Let's take this little lectern right here on the desk for a minute. What would be the material cause of this lectern in Aristotle's sense? The question then is, what kind of matter is it made of? Well, there's wood and plastic, it looks like, primarily. Maybe some little hidden fasteners, some glue. In other words, this part of understanding what this thing is understanding the stuff it's made out of. As it came into being, certain materials were chosen for that were not chosen for, say, this marker. And one reason the lectern is different from this marker is they have different stuff that they're made out of. Interesting that Greek word, hule, for matter or stuff, is derived from their word for wood, because that was sort of one of the primary building materials that you made things out of in those days. All right, so what kind of matter is it made out of? What would you, oh, I got 2 formals instead of a final here. All right, formal, efficient, and final. What would count as a formal cause if we were talking about this lectern? There can be some overlapping, but that would probably be another one. Well, yeah, that's part of it. What it actually is, she said. There's a sense in which that this is a lectern and this is not. It is because the form of the two is different. The form of this is different from the form of that. It has a certain size. It has certain angles and shapes. And so we know it's a lectern. It's not a Volvo, or something. And that's because of the shape. And because there's so many things of familiar shape, we can distinguish between them. So that's the kind of the formal. Now there are mathematical features to that. Somewhere, somebody took into account all that quantitative stuff. You'd have to turn out a whole bunch of these in some factory somewhere. So that's where we get down to the third one, the efficient cause. What would you say is the efficient cause of this lectern? All right. it may be efficient as long as it tends to hold my books and notes up okay. Then we can say it functions efficiently. But what would be the efficient cause of this? Yeah, well, you're still pushing to the end of the list here. You're just way ahead of us here. In what sense? I mean, all 4 of these answers sort of deal with the question of why they exist. Where did it come from? Did it fall out of heaven, or did it wrapped up in plastic and packaged to be shipped off to Wingate? Or, somebody made it, yeah. And that would be the efficient cause. Somewhere. I don't suppose we're looking at some old carpenter, sawing away with ancient tools. I have a feeling this comes out of a machine somewhere, or several machines linked together in an assembly line and put together and marketed and sold and shipped and all that. And that's sort of the efficient side. Somebody's out there doing something to produce this lectern. And in doing that, they made decisions, of course, or somebody did about the material and the formal elements, and then they put it together. And now we're down, Mary Beth, to the final cause, which is, what is it for? Yeah, why does it exist? What is it good for? And somebody, somewhere, maybe somebody who was having trouble seeing their notes on the desk and got tired of trying to lecture like this, thought, hey, let's build a lectern and get them up here where I can see them, you know, and sketch it out and build it. And probably somebody somewhere in your family kind of sketches out things they need and construct them, you know. People do that sort of thing. Not everybody buys everything in their lives. Sometimes people figure out what they need and put them together. And they do it because they've got this sense of this end or goal. Now, that's what brings us back to this notion of teleology. Teleology is not a word that Aristotle used. It's a kind of a modern 18th century word, but it captures something very important about Aristotle. The Greek word that is important there is the word telos, which means goal, purpose, end, those kinds of things. And so a teleological explanation is an explanation in terms of what the purpose of something is and whether that something achieves its purpose. Now, there's probably one other word we ought to throw in because we're going to come back to this later. The formal cause of something gets at the essence. Somebody said what it is, but it's that particular word essence that philosophers like. This word for form or essence that Aristotle uses comes from the word to be, and it answers the question or makes a statement about what the thing is, or as we say in Alabama, what it bees, you know, the verb to be in that sense. It is this, or it is that. It is a lectern, or it is a chair. And that's the form of it. But now Aristotle does invent a new word that's important here. And it is this word, entelechy. Nobody used the word before, but he puts it together actually out of the roots of 3 Greek words. And you can see there the root telos. But this refers to any being that has its end in it somehow, already within it. It doesn't have to be provided outside by somebody who plans how to build furniture. And because he can focus on the entelechy that something has, he can ask questions like, what is something for? What is its purpose? And the big implication of this for us is to ask about the final end of humans. What might that be? And what do you think Aristotle would say? What's the purpose of humans? What's their end? Well, let's take something easier. What's the purpose of an acorn that falls out of the oak tree? To grow into another tree, perhaps. You know, now that's what the reproductive biologist will tell you. The ecologist might tell you it's there to feed squirrels, you know, because that's what happens to most of them, it seems, or deer or something. But there is a function. You know, it does from the perspective. If you could think like an oak tree, you know, you'd want to put out enough acorns to feed the squirrels who will go and bury them and have, you know, little oak trees springing up all around. But we don't really think of oak trees thinking that way. And so that's one kind of funny thing about somebody like Aristotle. Everything has got some sort of purpose in it. Now, the funniest line from Aristotle is, he asks one day, why is the stone on the ground? Well, it is the nature of stones to be on the ground. So if you drop a stone, it doesn't have any concept of gravity, you know. So he has to come up with something else. It's its nature to be there. Why does the chicken cross the road? I mean, you know, any of those kinds of questions then would have to be answered in terms of the nature that's there, and that's what does not work for scientists with Aristotle himself. All right, let me pull this together quickly here and point out why this is important, particularly for what we're going to do next time. Aristotle is going to talk about happiness, and we're going to try to figure out what kind of notion of happiness will work for Aristotle. But here is the key. Each of us as a rational being, as a being with a certain entelechy, will be fulfilled in the sense of what our life is like if we achieve happiness, if we become happy. And in trying to decide what that happiness is and how one actually achieves it, Aristotle produces one of the most influential works in Western philosophy. His Nicomachean Ethics is the place where we primarily find that. So we'll talk a little about that today, but mainly that'll be the subject of what we do on Friday. Thank you all for your participation.